Hello, this is Jonathan McNair,
And this is Rod McNair.
and this is Brother to Brother. So this week we were talking about a topic to bring to you, and it has to do with logistics and leadership. I say for both of us, a lot of what we do in our jobs is organizing and figuring out logistics and how to organize events, activities, etc. But as we were talking about it, especially with the Passover coming up, and as we're taping this, Passover is tomorrow evening, it just struck us that we can have so much emphasis on logistics and on organizing and making sure all the details are set with an activity. It could be Passover, for example, that we can get caught up in the details so much that we're not really keeping our mind on why we're doing what we're doing. So what we thought this week is we just talk about this challenge. It's a bit of a dichotomy, isn't it? It's a bit of a tension between making sure that everything is done decently and in order, as we read in 1 Corinthians 14:33, but not also getting caught up in the details so much that we forget why we're doing what we're doing. So that's some opening thoughts.
Yeah, I think, like you said, a part of leadership is really keeping the big picture and helping those that we are serving to keep the big picture as well. And I think about, why does Mr. Weston from time to time, keep coming back to why are we here? And why does he talk about in the update? Consistently the last few weeks, there have been references to Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread, Dr. Winnell as well. But keeping the big picture and understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it, and not just getting caught up in the details, because frankly, this time of year, there are a lot of physical preparations that have to be made. I mean, de-leavening. So it's very easy to get caught up in the details, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just thinking, this does apply to leadership, because it oftentimes the scope or the way details are handled in something do lie at the feet of the leader. It could be a pastor, it could be an elder, it could be a deacon, or someone who's designated. I guess I'm thinking particularly of the Passover. Let's just think about the Passover tomorrow evening for one, okay, as a starting point. It's a leadership function to determine how we do what we do, how much time we give to it, how much detail, how much specific instruction we give to it. And it's really up to that person to make sure that it's done in balance without getting things out of whack in terms of forgetting why we're doing what we're doing.
And that's a trick, isn't it? Doing it with balance, where you're taking care of the details. I mean, you don't want, the bread forgotten or the wine forgotten on the night of Passover, or major.
That hurts.
Major breakdown.
That hurts. Now and I'm gonna have to share, because you opened up the wound.
Sorry about that.
Okay, fine. I'll admit it. Years ago,
I can tell the story if you want.
No, I don't know where it'll go.
Probably be worse.
Years ago, we had a family weekend, really nice activity planned, and boy, I thought the Passover was all planned out perfectly. Everything was in order. And it was not too long before the service was set to begin when as I asked the person that I thought I had delegated to bring the wine, that they looked at me with a quizzical look and said, "What?"
So how many minutes before the Passover was to begin
was this? It was probably about an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. So I mean, it was a while before. The problem was we were out in the middle of nowhere.
Whoa!
So I mean, we were in the mountains, in the Catskills, and this was not like drive down the street to go to a liquor store or something, or to a grocery store.
That's not good.
No, it was really very. It was very, very much anxiety inducing, because I I jumped in the car and I drove to where I could get some wine. As it turned out, I went to, I found a nearby, what would you call it? Like not an Airbnb, really more of a small resort that I pulled into, and I went to the food area there, and I found the owner, and I said, "Look, could I buy some wine for you?" He looks around. There's nobody around. I
need
begged
10
him.
bottles of wine.
I
5
begged
bottles
him,
of wine.
please, will you please sell me a bottle of wine? And again, okay, so now maybe I'm bearing my soul here in my mistake and not making sure, following it up and making sure that was done. I thought it had been done, but it's an example though of on the one hand, you want to make sure things are organized. That was not a good thing. That should have been taken care of. And what I've learned is as far as the wine, for example, it's always good to have at least 1 or 2 or 3 backups to the wine, because you never know. Somebody who's bringing the wine, if it's just one person, they could have a car accident or something.
Right.
So backups are good. And so in all this, we're not saying that organization is not good.
Right.
And because even when you do the best you can to organize things and to pay attention to details, sometimes things are going to fall through the cracks. The problem is when all we think about is the details,
right,
to the point where we're not actually focusing. And I say as a leader,
right,
because it's leader's job to make sure to focus everybody's attention on what's happening, why we're doing this, not just on how.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and but that's the challenge of leadership, isn't it? The balance of getting things done, of following up, of having a backup, having a plan, delegation, getting people involved, and yet remembering and keeping the picture of why we're doing it, because you can get lost in the details. I'm thinking of Moses. He was when his father-in-law came to him and asked him, "What are you doing?" And because he was standing all day long in dealing with the questions and problems that the Israelites had, and he said, "Look, you're going to wear yourself out. You need to get other people involved." So there is a matter of logistics, of let's back to the Passover, one person not doing it all, right? Because that's not going to help that person be able to keep perspective of what's going on. Because if everything is on their shoulders, wow, there's no way they're going to be able to be thinking about why am I here, and even be able to function, about why we keep the Passover. So, but it's a leadership function.
Maybe this is one of the reasons why careful and thorough planning is important, to allow the leader to be able to then have those things taken care of, such that you can focus attention on the why. Why we're here, without having to worry about, again, last minute snafus.
Right.
But again, the challenge is allowing those details to dominate the whole thing is not good. But well done, plans well made, it actually can assist in being able to focus on the important things.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you say is one of the best, let's say, examples in the Bible that explains this idea of not getting caught up in the details?
Well, I guess the Mary and Martha section is probably a really good example of Christ's admonition to Martha not to get so hung up, or he encouraged and he applauded, you might say, Mary's attitude of actually wanting to listen to him, as opposed to getting so caught up, or I think you were reading a moment ago, distracted by the details.
Yeah, it's right here in Luke chapter 10 and verse 38. Now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. So she was very hospitable, and she was wanting him to be there, and that was a wonderful thing. She had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving.
Mm-hmm.
And she approached him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore, tell her to help me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at first you can feel sorry for Martha, like, well, of course, Mary should have been helping her out.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and you're right that, frankly, the Passover, this is a great illustration of how to approach the Passover, because they were actually being able to talk to, and she was being able to learn from Jesus Christ himself.
Distracted with much serving. That's quite a statement, isn't it? I'm thinking of how we can have our identity framed by service.
Yeah.
So that, in other words, we serve in a capacity in the congregation. We set up chairs. We organize the Passover. We organize the flow of how the Passover, how I'm going to say the traffic flow to do the foot washing, and we organize how the wine is handed out and the bread is handed out, and we do this, and we do this type of thing year in, year out in a congregation, and that becomes our identity. And as we go into that Passover service, for example, it could be such that the most important thing about the Passover for us is getting all those things right.
Right.
Because it's on our mind. This is why, as an example, we really discourage someone from having a funeral or wedding or something like that on the Sabbath, or even right after the Sabbath on a Sabbath evening, because our minds can only focus on so much at a time.
That's true.
And even on Sabbath Eve, after the Sabbath, having a big event like that, all day during the Sabbath, it's hard not to be thinking about that. So our minds, they are occupied by the details of what's in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
The Passover, if our identity, everything about us, it's important we do this right, because otherwise we'll be looked upon as not effective or something.
Yeah.
Then that bothers us. What's on our mind for the Passover if we're not mindful?
Right. Yeah, that's an important point. Ecclesiastes 7:16 says, "Don't be overly righteous or overly wise, for why would you destroy yourself?" And I know it's a different, overall different concept, but I think the same general principle is there, that you can be so focused on certain minutia that you forget the whole purpose of why you're doing what you're doing. And leadership, one of the functions of leadership is to continually reframe and remind all of us, why are we doing what we're doing?
Sure. This is something that obviously doesn't just apply to the Passover either. And this is why I think it applies to this podcast and leadership and what leadership's about, because really it applies to a lot of what we do in the church and serving God, doesn't it? It applies to the Sabbath day. I mean, it applies, for example, we can get so caught up in, setting up a sound system or taking care of the coffee and the cookies, or for those in England and Australia, the biscuits.
Yeah.
Isn't that what they say? Biscuits?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know exactly, but I think you're right.
For those who don't know the difference, American biscuits are, they're a big hunk of bread.
Yeah, that's right.
But
that are really good.
They're really good, but
with butter, especially when they come right out of the oven.
This actually, I think this is a good time, and maybe we ought to conduct a poll among our watchers about matzah versus homemade unleavened bread.
Oh.
What are you? Are you a matzah guy, or are you a homemade unleavened bread guy?
Oh, homemade unleavened bread always takes the cake.
Me too.
Takes
the cake.
That's a bad.
That's not a good expression for this. To me, okay, I'm with you. I love homemade unleavened bread. Now, if you take a matzah and you put butter, maybe I'm going to say a quarter of an inch, a half an inch of butter on it.
Whoa, yeah.
And then you put some peanut butter with honey mixed in.
Yeah.
With banana slices on top of it and a little drizzle of chocolate.
Yeah.
Now that's the way to eat a matzah.
And maybe a few onions on the side.
Oh, If the onions are in the matzah, I suppose. If it's an onion matzah. Where do we?
I like it.
Well,
yeah. I'm getting hungry.
It would be a
for
great
matzos
poll.
now.
I think it'd be a great poll
It
for
would be.
our listeners and
It would
watchers
be.
too.
Do we have a way to
I-
get their responses?
I don't know. We could figure something out.
We'll figure that out.
But it is. Oh, I'm sorry.
What are we talking about?
We're talking about leadership and matzahs. No, not leadership
Okay.
and matzahs. Leadership and logistics. So, but it is. With the Sabbath, we can get
Yeah.
caught so caught up in doing the functions of having a service that
Yeah.
we lose sight of why we come to church, why we assemble ourselves together. When we're told in Hebrews that we're to do that in order to encourage others,
Right.
to
Right.
to lift up others, encourage others, and of course we're there to learn and so on. So if we get caught up in the minutia, that doesn't mean that we don't have to do those
No,
things.
That's right, because if there's no planning at all, if there's no plan, then Passover is going to be a chaotic
Yeah.
mess.
It
And that
adds
doesn't
stress.
honor God either.
Yeah.
But clearly there is balance, and there's a middle ground where it's a respectful evening. It's a sober evening. It shows him honor, but it also is one where everyone is, because it's working, because the plan is working, everyone can focus on the right thing.
Right.
And I think you're right that needs to be, even the people who are handling the details need to be able to focus on the right thing.
Yeah.
And if one person is doing too much, that's impossible.
And it's a leadership role to remind those who are involved in some of the details. It is a leadership role to discern how to create the atmosphere where things are organized and done decently in order, but they are not allowed to superimpose themselves on why we're doing it. That is a leader's responsibility. That takes
Yeah.
discernment, takes vision, takes the ability to step back and look at the big picture. That's a leadership function.
Yeah.
And it can't. I think a pastor or an elder or deacon, what have you, cannot dish that off, the blame for that off on let's say those who are involved in the organization. Can't say, well, it's not, they just got too involved. That person the leader needs to help and coach and work with them on. That's a leadership function.
Would you say that in some ways what we're talking about is what happened with the temple worship between the time that, David put a lot of the functions, whether singers or different ones, the courses of the priesthood, he put a lot of that in motion. And yet by the time Christ came, it had become sort of just a shell. And then obviously there were other sacrifices and all of that goes back all the way to Mount Sinai. But by the time Christ came, the details had just become an empty shell that had lost its meaning. So this is not a theoretical thing.
And it's not, let's say, a modern thing. It's only current. Yeah. Here in the last weeks, we've been going through Jeremiah, then Ezekiel in our class with the Living Education Charlotte students in the prophets class. And when you say that, it reminds me of what Jeremiah and Ezekiel both had to deal with, and that was that the people there at Jerusalem, they believed that God would not allow Jerusalem to be destroyed, the temple to be desecrated, because he just couldn't. They were so fixated on the temple. And Jeremiah, of course, said the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. And he reminded them of what God had allowed to happen with the Ark of the Covenant, when it was brought into battle by the Israelites as some sort of a symbol, a token to the when they were battling the Philistines, and how God allowed it to be taken. It wasn't just the thing. So I guess what I'm thinking is when you're mentioning that, they as prophets battle with that thinking on the part of especially the people of Jerusalem, saying that God certainly won't let us and won't let the temple fall, and yet he did. And of course, Ezekiel was over 900 miles away in the area of Babylon by the river Kibar, and God inspired him to actually address that of his compatriots back. I think some of them, the way it reads, it's almost as if they felt a little bit superior. They had not been taken into captivity. They were still okay. And they had the temple. They had the stuff, the thing, along with you might say the ceremonies and the details of that. So this is something that could happen with the Feast of Tabernacles as well, can't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, we can get consumed in the actions. That's why even I know from CAD, you, Dr. Winnale, Mr. Weston have really encouraged the coordinators to have a balanced menu of activities. So everyone isn't just running and running and running, not able to actually think and consider why.
You've used this term before, but the coordinator is not a cruise ship director. It's not his job to just provide with lots of external shell of stuff to do. Because the feast can become that as well, where the activities become the substance.
So it's a leadership challenge, certainly. Just before we close, a couple thoughts. So what are issues that bear on this? As you think about it, I'm thinking of one. So in other words, when I say this, I mean the logistics and the details and the organization. What are issues that bear on this that have to be kept in mind as we, at the same time, if we're in a leadership role, we try to hold up, most importantly, the vision of why we're doing what we're doing and all that. What are some issues that come to bear?
What's one that you have?
So I'm thinking the size of the group, for example. So in other words, if your group is your congregation, let's say for Passover, for example, if it's a small group, truly the ramifications of the preparations certainly can be downsized.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's a very different thing than organizing, let's say for 20 people. Let's just say half of them are men, half of them are women. Now you're talking about 10 people, two small rooms, or having, the men go to another room or something, and have that organization with 10 men, 10 women versus 200. If you have 100 or 200 people, it's a very different thing. I'm thinking of some of the times that we've done it, where the rooms that can be used for the foot washing are not very large. And so we end up thinking, how can we do this and not cram everybody in and all? But sometimes, and maybe that's another issue. I don't want to jump into another one, the facility, but that would certainly be one, is the size of the group.
No, that's very true. I think another one is remembering that every single person there is there to worship God and participate in the substance of the evening. There, you don't have some that are there that, I'm here to do security. I'm here to to carry the basins. Well, yes, there are functions, but every single person there is there primarily to worship God.
Yeah, when you're in a serving capacity, you can think of yourself as have a certain separateness from the group because you have to do this job, and that can really be a problem, even in terms of the way we think as the ministry. We're also there to observe the service and be part of it. So we don't have a separate place where we do foot washing only for ministers or something. We're with the group. It's just as meaningful and important for us as an ordained person as it is for anybody else, and we're all part of that together. So yeah, definitely.
What's another thing that you think about?
Well, I started to mention the facility size, and the facility that is something that comes to bear in terms of the details and what obviously that starts first of all with selecting a facility, and a facility that, whether it's Sabbath services or the Feast of Tabernacles, or we talked about this in the light of the Feast of Tabernacles, our last podcast, where selecting a site,
Right.
it really bears on the atmosphere, all that. Well, certainly in any situation, whether it's a Passover service or a Sabbath service, a holy day, the facility does have a bearing on the amount of work that goes into preparing or running or orchestrating the event. Here's an example. I was thinking there's one hall, I can't think of where it was at this point, but I just remember one congregation where the hall we met in, literally we had to mop, we had to really do a thorough cleaning of the hall every time before services. And it was not good. But we had no choice. It was all we could get that would serve our needs, but not ideal at all, So because it impacted the work that went into the logistics part of the service. So if we can have a place that is clean, is such that we don't have to do a lot of cleaning, has chairs ready at hand, places that we can store our things, which we try to do, the sound system or what have you. That's helpful. So logistics do depend to some degree on the facility, and that needs to be taken into account. But I guess my point is that we don't need to overdo as well.
Right.
With a smaller group, a small facility, we need to scale back all the preparations that aren't really truly necessary.
Yeah.
And focus on why we're there.
Yeah. Yep. I think another point, just sort of takeaway, is delegation. It always is better to whether you're talking about the pastor, whether you're talking about deacons or other men who are organizing the different parts of this, or an elder in the congregation. It's so easy to do more ourselves than we need to, and it can help us get our minds onto fewer of the details when we include others in the process.
Yeah.
And then we can be a part of the overview and the big picture ourselves.
Share the work, make it a team effort.
Yeah.
And that does require extra effort sometimes, because you have to familiarize people with what's necessary. And
training.
Yeah,
that's right.
So it does take more effort at the front end, but also I think all of us enjoy being part of things, and
Right.
enjoy being part of a team effort. So
Right.
that is important.
I do think that before we close, how about that for a teaser?
There you go.
About that we're
You're going to.
that we're getting closer to ending. Are we getting closer to ending, or
We are.
okay? Just checking. But before we close, we don't want any of this to be sort of taken as not appreciating the work that goes into it.
Right.
And a lot of work in the preparation, like you're talking about in a Sabbath hall, or it might be in some cases the Passover hall, where there is a little bit more, cleaning up the hall or preparing the hall ahead of time. And none of this is intended to take away from those who are doing those tasks, and everybody else arrives and it's all ready to go.
That's true.
And that is much appreciated, because we know a lot of people do an awful lot of work to make it work. But I think, like, Mary and Martha,
Right.
the point is
It's priorities.
it's it's priorities, and that that work is appreciated. We just all need to get the right balance.
And again, that's a leadership function, and I think it behooves us to ask God in prayer as we come up to activities, as we do activities, as we exercise leadership. Ask God for discernment and guidance and help, and actually diplomacy in dealing with people, so we can't, because everyone has a little bit of a different perspective on how things should be done and all that.
Yeah.
So that's a leadership role to actually, just like Solomon did when he asked God for wisdom because he was like a little child and doing this job. Well, we're like a little child and trying to lead and sort out and help and discern what's best and how we do it, what we do, but also not forget the why. That actually is something we want God involved in, and we want His Holy Spirit to help to guide all that. So that's part of what leadership is all about.
And it's a lifetime learning process, isn't it?
Sure.
You never achieve perfect balance. I mean, when are we going to get perfect balance in this lifetime? But we're trying.
And you know what? Situations change.
Yeah.
We may think we've got it figured out with a situation, and next thing you know, we have more people, less people. We have someone is not able to help. Another one is able to help. It's a dynamic.
You're right.
Situation, and that's what leadership is about: being able to adjust and adapt. But at the same time, we're accountable to God to make sure that we're doing it according to His mind.
Right.
And that's important. Okay, well, thanks for taking the time to sit down with me. Appreciated discussing this with you a little bit and sharing it with our audience.
Mm-hmm.
This has been Jonathan McNair.
And Rod McNair.
And this has been Brother to Brother. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.